Hey guys, Mr. Rhodes here. So I'm going to walk us through our mini lesson and some part of what we're doing today. So I'll be honest, this is one of the hardest things to learn how to do, really. But it's probably one of the most important skills. And what I'm talking about is paying attention to the way people talk to us to try to manipulate us. And that's a life skill here. There's an actual AKS that we're going to be talking about, but what this AKS can do for you in your life is help you to notice when someone's manipulating you with the kind of language they're using. So we're going to get into a little bit of a think aloud here, where I'm going to walk you through my thought process with an article, which then you can do the same thing in the articles that you look at today. So we're going to practice this. It's going to take a lot of practice, but basically, you're going to open this up here in a second and just kind of, well, I'm going to open it up and use it as an example. And you're going to need it for later on in today's activity. But um, in fact, anyway, getting ahead of myself. So the skill we're looking at today is this AKS 15, which is determining an author's point of view or purpose in a text and analyzing how they use rhetoric to advance that point of view or purpose. Rhetoric is a fancy word for fancy language. And what I mean by fancy language is like when your language is doing something more than just what it appears to be on the surface. So rhetoric is when language is like a lot more meaningful than just the diction, just the definition. So, like for instance, rhetoric can be repetition. Rhetoric can be, when we start playing around with charged language. So we're going to be doing a lot with charged language. And what I mean by charged language, that's when you're using words that have a connotation or a meaning that's a lot more than just what could have been said. Like, it's charged in that it's inflammatory. It creates an emotional response. Okay, so it's language designed to create an emotional response. It's charged language. Um, and so we're also going to be looking at ethos, logos, and pathos, or my favorite way of thinking about it is heart, head, and cred. So authors oftentimes, especially in speeches or really anytime anyone's trying to manipulate someone, they're using pathos. Pathos means heart. So someone's emotions. They're using language that appeals to someone's emotions, or it like asks you to have an emotional response. Logos is head. So it appeals to your logic. It appeals to your thinking brain, like, oh, it's a logical thing to do. And then ethos. That's when someone appeals to you based on their credibility. So like based on like who they are. So I think of those things like heart, head, and cred. And those are the three big appeals that people use when they're using rhetoric to try to manipulate. So I mean, think about a politician, right? They're going to like think about some of the recent speeches we've seen from Joe Biden, right? He talks about how like kids in cages, when he talks about that, referring to immigrant children who are detained by ICE. Um, he's going to use some charged language. Instead of saying immigrant children detained by ICE, he might say something like, kids in cages, because that creates an emotional response to imagine a kid in a cage. Joe Biden might talk about the numbers of growing dead, related to COVID, right? So he's trying to manipulate you with numbers, right? Talking about the logic behind, it's the numbers don't lie, right? So that's like a logical appeal. Or even just think about the fact that he's been vice president, so he has experience. That would be appealing to you based on his credibility, right? His track record. So those are different appeals that people make, when they're trying to manipulate you or trying to advance their purpose in talking to you. Obviously, Joe Biden, everything he's saying right now is to try to get elected. So he's going to be using these different appeals, and President Trump is too. So it's that's what you see that a lot in politics. So it's important to understand that you're being manipulated on purpose because they want something. Trump wants to stay president and Joe Biden wants to become president. So they're using these different things. And another really obvious way we see rhetoric is just when authors repeat ideas, phrases, or words. But those are all conscious choices that authors make. So here's our teaching point for today, readers. I'm gonna teach you how to identify an author's point of view in an informational text by looking at the rhetoric or language they use. So we're gonna look for noticings. We're gonna note and notice, when they repeat ideas, when they use pathos, logos, and ethos, or heart, head, and cred. And we're going to look out for charged language. And, readers do this, like we do this, in order to better understand the author's message, but also to see their point of view and bias in their topic. So when we're noticing these things, we can kind of think about, like, what is their point of view that they're trying to communicate, and also what is their bias here? What's their hot take on it, right? Okay, so let's open up our mini lesson here. And so we talked about this AKS already, determining the author's point of view and how they use rhetoric to advance that point of view or purpose. And here's our teaching point. Pretty cool. You like my little emojis? Yeah, I added those in for flavor. So this is an article from Fox News called "Trump Philadelphia Police Shooting a Terrible Event, but Rioting Comes from a Group Joe Biden Supports." So this is from Fox News. I put the link right there for you guys if you want to open this up and look at this yourself. But what I did was I copied this into a Google Doc to make this easier for us to play with today. So here we go. Rioters and looters have taken to the streets in Philadelphia after the police shooting of Walter Wallace Jr. First sentence, I'm noticing some charged language, right? They didn't say protesters. They said rioters and looters. So like that to me is an example of charged language. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that in purple. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to say, like, I'm going to add a comment there. I'm going to say right from go. I see Fox News using these words instead of protesters. This shows a bias of opinion and labels protesters as criminals, because there were a lot more people than just rioters and looters, right? And this is a response to a man being murdered by police officers, a man in need. Yeah, there's a lot more going on here. So anyway, President Trump called on Democrats in Philadelphia to crack down on recent rioting and blamed Joe Biden for not condemning the unrest strongly enough. Okay. So rioters and looters have taken to the streets in Philadelphia again. So now we have repetition, right? Because they're sitting there repeating. So this is repetition. I always misspell repetition. I don't think I've ever spelled that right. It's repet. That's P-E-T. Okay. Repetition of this phrase to really strengthen the point of who people are according to Fox News and frame them by their worst, like the worst in the group here. There are rioters and looters, but that's not Fox News is choosing to highlight those particular people and not the people that are protesting, peacefully. So I've taken to the streets in Philadelphia after police shooting of Walter Wallace Jr., a black man who police claim was charging at them with a knife. And so that to me is, I'm gonna say that there's something going on there, right? This whole thing with charging at them with a knife, as opposed to like walking at them with a knife. Because I've actually seen the video, and I would not call that a charge. Definitely not a charge. And two officers fired 14 rounds, killing Wallace. So they shot him. They shot him 14 times. Trump, speaking to reporters, called the police shooting a terrible event. The mayor or whoever this is a quote. It's important to pay attention there. The mayor or whoever it was or whoever it is that's allowing people to riot and loot and not stop them is also just a horrible thing, Trump said. I saw the event. Everybody did. It was on television. It was a terrible event. I guess that's being looked at very strongly. We have the federal government looking at it also, but the rioting in Philadelphia has to stop. They have to stop it. Okay. So again, he's calling it a terrible event that everybody saw. I guess that's being looked at very strongly. So these are Trump's words. And so using Trump here, like that is a that is a specific move Fox News is doing here. So I'm gonna say that I'm gonna call this out as ethos and the credibility of the president. There's one important thing we need to do, readers, when we're looking at texts and for like especially news articles, is why did they use the quote they used? They could have used a quote from the police officers. They could have used a quote from the neighborhood people who saw it happen. They could have used a quote from Walter Wallace Jr.'s mother, who was there. But instead, they're using a quote here from the president. And that's really a lot about the credibility of the president and the value of his words, because he is the president of the United States of America. So that definitely advances their point of view or develops their point of view, because it's going to this. And if their point of view is that Joe Biden is not strong on is not strong on condemning the unrest. So I'm actually going to say that this is our central idea now that I've read a little bit. If that's our central idea, then using a direct quote from President Trump about that thing is going to really help develop that point, right? It's going to help develop the point that Joe Biden isn't strong enough on this crime with these rioters and these looters, because it's President Trump speaking about it. So that is a very strong move there of using the credibility of the president to develop this point that Fox News is making a point that Joe Biden isn't strong enough. That's Fox News's point with this whole article. And they're using Walter Wallace here as a point, almost as a pawn, to say that Joe Biden is not strong enough against crime. And they're using Walter Wallace's death as an example, and the subsequent protesting and the rioting and looting as evidence that he's not strong enough on crime. And they're also using President Trump and his words here as credibility for Fox News's argument. So you have to kind of separate out, this is President Trump didn't write this. Fox News wrote this, right? So this is an article by Fox News, and they're using these quotes here on purpose. So everything they do here is on purpose. Biden says no excuse for looting in Philadelphia after black man killed by police. So They should bring in the National Guard if the police need help, and they should do something. This is again President Trump. Um, you can't let that go again. A Democrat-run state, a Democrat-run city. Trump continued. He said that that Republican-run regions didn't have such issues. So Fox News is using um, ethos again with Trump's words to make a claim that this isn't just Philly, but all states with Democrats are problematic because they are weak on crime. I'm gonna put crime in parentheses because or quotes because that's what they're trying to say this is, right? It's crime. You know, and so not a problem with the police, but a problem with crime. And so this is kind of framing their argument in that way. And this develops the argument that Biden and Democrats now all Democrats are weak on crime. Okay, so again, this is ethos. So more ethos. So remember, going back to our teaching point, we're looking for heart, head, and cred, and we're looking for the repetition of words and phrases, and we're looking for charged language and how authors use those things to develop their point of view or their point, right? Okay, so let's keep going. The Pennsylvania National Guard was deployed in Philadelphia on Tuesday as the city braced for a second night of unrest. The move made by, and we could even say that this piece right here is pathos, which is emotions, right? Like you imagine a whole city like braced for unrest, which is emotion. Saying a whole city is braced for unrest is emotional language. Because it makes you worry about the city, which is now under threat from these violent, terrorists, looters, rioters. The move by Governor Tom Wolf, a Democrat, to activate the National Guard is a stark difference from other Democratic governors who have been hesitant or slow to mobilize troops in response to unfolding unrest. So this is a little bit of praise here for Governor Tom Wolf, who's doing things a little different. He's actually bringing in the National Guard. Trump also turned his attention to Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden. Here we go. This is a group that he supports. He doesn't want to condemn them, Trump said of the rioters. I saw that he doesn't want to condemn them. You have to condemn. You have to be strong. You can't have chaos like that, and he'll be very, very weak. So here he is. He's doing several things here. Or Fox News is using this quote to do several things. Again, this is all about how all about how Biden is weak. Joe Biden is not strong enough. Joe Biden does not condemn. And so here's this quote here that's totally supporting that. So I see a few things going on, right? I see ethos because again, it's using President Trump to say these things about Biden, which advances Fox News's point of view. It also uses, like, look at this repetition: condemn. I'm going to highlight condemn. I'm going to highlight condemn. So he's saying that it's not condemning. It's not condemning. It's not, you have to condemn. You have to condemn. You have to be strong. You can't be weak. And so this is all being used here to. So I see. Let's see if I can spell it right this time. Repetition. Oh, I spelled it right. It's using repetition, and the ethos of the president to call Biden weak and to say that he is not strong against crime. This further develops and restates Fox News's point. All right, so I just wanted to show you guys some examples of how to kind of do this. Is pick apart your articles to try to find that bias and try to find the author's point of view, and how they use these rhetorical strategies. These are called rhetorical strategies. It's a strategy using language, right? And this is all very specifically designed to get you to be swayed to their point of view. They're trying to convince you of their point of view to bring you over to their side of thinking, right? And they're using these different strategies to do that. By using very specific words, by using things like rioters and looters instead of protesters, right? They're talking about cracking down, on how Joe Biden is weak. They're using these like words from President Trump because he's the president of the United States, so like ultimate credibility there. And they're using a lot of repetition here of these ideas. So yeah, that's just some of the ways that this is unfolding here on Fox News. If I were to pull up an article on CNN about Trump, I would find something just as biased against Trump. I would find something just as biased against, everything Trump is doing wrong. So like this is just an example here from Fox News, but you can find this exact same thing about how bad Trump is on CNN. So pretty interesting. Just want to point that out. But anytime you see this kind of language, just realize you're being manipulated. Like they're trying to get you to see their point of view, and it's a really powerful thing to do. You can do it in your writing too, and we'll practice that some this year.